Hello and welcome to the Arcane Forge. My name's Josh and today we are going to be starting off this spooky month, which I'm going to be calling Cryptober, a month of talking about the world's cryptids, drawing them and hopefully giving you something that you can walk away with to use in your D&D campaigns, homebrewing them into D&D if they're not already in some way represented in D&D. I'm going to be kicking off this month with the beloved Mothman, who may be more avian than moth, but I'll let my research, my illustration, and the lore and sightings of this mysterious and beloved cryptid speak for itself. Enjoy! Mothman, also sometimes referred to as the Mason bird monster, is one of the most popularly known cryptids that I'm likely to talk about this month. And while they may not have been around quite as long as more enduring creatures like Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster, they're definitely one of the creatures who gets spoken about most frequently in contemporary conversations surrounding cryptids. The Mothman has found its way into books, films, TV series, several very, very entertaining songs, and all sorts of other media capturing the hearts of the world. Originally hailing from a city called Point Pleasant in West Virginia in the United States, this creature's first recorded sighting was on November 15th, 1966. On this misty evening, in the dead of night, two couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry, and Steve and Mary Mallet, were driving through a densely wooded area which was formerly the site of a large World War II munitions plant known locally as the TNT area. They were later described to be drag racing on this unusually long and straight section of road in Roger Scarberry's 1957 Chevy. While all four claimed to see exactly the same creature lurking in the middle of the road, their initial descriptions to police didn't explicitly describe anything insectoid or even vaguely moth-like. Something which is weirdly common in sightings of a creature known as Mothman. The couples described this beast as a large, quote, flying man with 10-foot wings whose eyes glowed red, end quote. Unlike future sightings, they mentioned that these eyes either glowed or rather reflected red light when the car's headlights shone on them. These eyes were said to be 2 inches in diameter and 6 inches apart. This shining is not uncommon in the animal kingdom. Famously, most roads have devices which reflect light built into the lane markings, known as cat eyes, to reflect the headlights from oncoming traffic and illuminate the road for people to navigate without the means of electricity. Cats literally have a part of their eyes known as the shining layer, or more commonly known by the Latin version, tapetum lucidum, which I suppose distances cats from the writings of Stephen King, although it's probably likely that if any animals have the shining, cats probably do. But the tapetum lucidum is a layer of reflective cells near the retina, which help to trap light inside the cat's eye and keep it bouncing around in there, which gets a lot more light on the retinas of cats, helping them to see incredibly well in the dark. And this is a fairly common feature in the animal kingdom, certainly among nocturnal predators. But I don't think, and I could be wrong, but I don't believe that there's any animal to date with eyes that literally glow red. The closest that we see on a regular basis, or saw a lot more before digital photography, was the red eye phenomenon in photographs. The bright flash of a film camera would sometimes illuminate the backs of our own very meaty eyeballs, showing up as red on film. But digital photography usually tends to automatically darken these red eyes now. And while no animal's eyes reflect purely red light to my knowledge in the same luminous degree that cat eyes do, owls who very closely match the descriptions of Mothman as winged nocturnal creatures with sickle-like talons, large eyes and squat necks are known to, just like humans, reflect this sort of red light, but to a much, much greater extent. And they have this peculiarly visible red membrane at the back of their eyes, which becomes more noticeable when a bright light is shined upon it. While this isn't exactly reflective or glowing, it's still very startling and acts just like our own eyes in photographs, but in the comparatively huge orbits of owls, this red illumination can be seen with torches, not just with a strong camera flash. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. A group of gravediggers saw a massive bird-like being flying over the TNT area a few days before the Scarberries and the Mallet sighting. One common feature of closer sightings, first made by Linda Scarberry, who was also in the front seat of the car, made note that while the silhouette of the creature is very humanoid, measuring roughly 6 feet in height, and these large eyes pierce through the otherwise black silhouette of this creature, no discernible head or neck seems to sprout from the top of this beast, as a human's might, indicating that its head might jut forward with the spinal column attaching to the back, a lot like a lot of quadrupedal creatures and long-necked birds like vultures, rather than from underneath like typical bipedal animals tend to. Alternatively, the Mothman may simply have no neck. Justifiably spooked by this, both the couples and their later identified Mothman fled the scene, only for it to return, hunt the couples down, and give chase from the sky as the four, now panicking, sped down Route 62 to escape their airborne stalker. The utterly terrifying part of this encounter is that these couples reportedly couldn't escape this creature even though they were absolutely booking it at speeds in excess of 100 miles an hour. In the days surrounding November 15th, 1966, the sheriff's office was inundated with reported sightings of similar creatures. 2 volunteer firemen reported seeing what they called, quote, a large bird with red eyes, end quote, which was chalked up to being potentially an unusually massive heron of some kind that authorities believed to be in the area, which they called a shitepoke, a term that I had to double check meant a type of heron, and thankfully it does, because at least in the UK, that would definitely refer to something that the YouTube algorithm would be extremely angry at me discussing without it having a literal scientific term, and referring to a very specific animal, but also sounds like a fantastic insult that will be stored away in my Rolodex for my next argument. Contractor Newell Partridge told Mason County Sheriff George Johnson that, quote, when he aimed a flashlight at the creature in a nearby field, its eyes glowed like bicycle reflectors and blamed buzzing noises from the television set and the disappearances of his German Shepherd on this creature, end quote. Many of the sightings of Mothman liken it more to some kind of avian creature than an insect of some kind, citing feathery wings as one of its few discernible features through its dark silhouette. One eyewitness account by Faye Dewitt Laporte, one of the absolute coolest names I've heard in my life, claims that one night, while out driving with her brother, the Mothman hopped on the hood of their car and was so close that if she rolled down her window, she would have been able to touch this creature. She states that when it took off to the skies, it spread, quote, the biggest pretty set of wings because you could see the feathers, end quote. Wildlife biologist Robert L. Smith at the West Virginia University told reporters that these sightings sounded an awful lot like a creature known as a sandhill crane, a large American crane with a 7-foot wingspan, which, when stood upright, could almost meet the average human male's eye span, which has very peculiar and very noticeable red-coloured rings around its eyes. While not initially believed to be native to this region, later sources have pointed out that the sandhill crane does currently dwell in the Point Pleasant area. But that still doesn't account for this creature's speed. The couples who made the initial sighting mentioned that not only did they find it impossible to outrace this thing at 100 miles an hour, but it reportedly left deep scratch marks on the roof of their car, something that a crane is very unlikely to be capable of. It was speculated at the time that the creature might have lived in one of the boilers of a nearby abandoned power plant close to the TNT area because of other buildings which were infested with pigeons, but no one could easily cite a reason why they would not also make their home in the speculated lair of Mothman unless they could sense the predator nearby. Executive Director Denny Bellamy of the Mason County Visitor Bureau claims that the TNT area was once a top-secret government facility, which, among other things, experienced all sorts of military projects, including experiments that helped to develop the atomic bomb, eventually leading to the site closing overnight when the now infamous bomb was dropped on Hiroshima in 1945. Workers were supposedly driven directly to their workstations on buses with blacked out windows so that they couldn't report on the various goings-on the base. While Mr. Bellamy doesn't explicitly state a connection between Mothman and this once secret government facility, the internet has absolutely exploded with ideas potentially identifying this creature as some radioactive mutant bird, moth, human, or a military experiment gone wrong, left to decay when the site was abandoned. Brendan Knight, a relative of the initial witnesses, reported that she and many others believe that the reports were of a mutated sandhill crane because of their known habitation in the region, and because of how famously toxic the local swamps and marshes have become. The nearby marshes have long been documented to contain toxic waste from the explosive base, which have been detected still leaking into the local water supply as late as the mid-1980s, eventually being made safe for local wildlife in 1997. Since the initial sighting, there have been more than 100 reported sightings of Mothman in and around Point Pleasant alone. The last reported sightings of the Mothman seem to be intrinsically tied to the collapse of the Silver Bridge. On December 15th, 1967, the Silver Bridge, a suspension bridge painted with a glossy aluminium paint, connected Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and Ohio over the Ohio River on Route 35, but collapsed under the weight of rush hour traffic, resulting in the deaths of 46 people. While this is an absolutely tragic event, many locals caught up in the excitement surrounding Mothman believe that they saw the creature moments before the collapse, spreading its wings atop the suspension bridge. Some have claimed that the collapse of the bridge was the Mothman's fault, and others believe that the Mothman is in some way a herald of this tragic event and was intending to warn people about its coming collapse, to scare people off of the bridge and save lives, which has led many to believe that the Mothman has precognitive psychic abilities, adding a layer of further mystery and confusion to this already peculiar creature. So obviously, Mothman has not become a part of D&D yet, but with Cryptober, it is my aim to allow you to walk away with a free homebrew creature. So I have made some stats on D&D Beyond that'll also be on my website, and for your convenience, linked down below in the description box. Hello. Now, I'm very sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to say a massive thank you to my patrons over on Patreon, and I hope you can join me in that as well. I'll take up as little time as I possibly can while I do this, so that I don't interrupt your enjoyment of the video. But it's important to note that without my patrons, this content, the Arcane Forge, the video you're watching, would not exist. So I hope you'll join me in saying a massive thank you to all of them who have supported me this month, but in particular, those who have gone above and beyond to the Silver Archway and above, who this month are Nicholas G. Silver, Benjamin Colburn, Jonathan Foster, George Punton, Yorick Beese, Nap in Camo, Duck Quack, The Smiling Sadist, Skyrush Soul, Amanda and Jake Westfall, Ethan Dibby, Nathan Stratton, Bartle Gruff the Great, Goblin, Braxton Hudson, Healthy Wolf, Xavier Heatherwick, Peter Balfe, Max Schluter, Tim Klima, Darth Caetana, Oliver Thorvald Mellock, Colby Monroe, Styrax, Ryan H., Max Copeland, Steve Harrison, Tamerling, Trevor Traub, Brandon Kerr, Dan Waterman, Dominique Jolly, Sam Hickson, AJ, It's Just Avi, Christian Palmer Smith, Aldrin, C, just the letter C, and anyone else who would like to join us this month. If you'd like to be a part of our community, I'll leave a link down below in my description box where you can find us and get rewards like commissions, copies of my illustrations, one-on-one live chats, additional exclusive Patreon videos, and thank yous and shoutouts just like this. So thank you so much for helping me thank those guys, and I'll let you get back to your video. Thank you so much. So what do we know about this creature from various reports and sightings that would allow us to make it in D&D? Well, honestly, a flying creature isn't utterly uncommon in the world of D&D. Honestly, it sounds a little bit like an Aarakocra, or a harpy maybe, perhaps an owl Aarakocra, shadow monk perhaps? At least that's how you could perhaps play Mothman yourself if you wanted to. Interesting things that I noticed in the various reports were perhaps this static disruption of the TV, the various birds trying to hide and flee from Mothman, not wanting to be too close to its nest or its lair. Perhaps it gives off some kind of fear aura, and it caused that German Shepherd to run away. So definitely it produces some kind of fear that animals can tap into more easily and instinctively than humans. It can fly at 100 miles an hour. It has glowing eyes that illuminates things, and its body is never truly described. No one has really seen much more of this thing other than just simply a silhouette. So it definitely needs to have stealth abilities and rely pretty much on being in darkness. One thing that I thought was interesting as well is that this creature might be deaf. It seems to be getting very, very close to people and then flee or attack them as if startled. Certainly in the case of the Scarberries, who were driving at 100 miles an hour doing drag races on a straight road, encountering it in the middle of the road. It seems strange that this creature would perhaps not be able to hear this drag racing and be shocked and startled by the headlights of this car, otherwise happy to stand in the middle of the road until people saw it, or in case it was provoked. And we have similar sort of creatures in things like Grimlocks, who can hear very, very well without being able to see, so it might be interesting to have a monster that has things in the other way. Perhaps players could escape or overpower this creature by relying on illusions or by distracting it while it's otherwise deaf. So how do we incorporate this into D&D? I've said the following. Mothmen, as their name implies, bear many features similar to moths, who in a previous life it's believed that these creatures may have resembled far more closely. Now though, reborn or reforged as avian spirits, these creatures are more visibly similar to harpies in appearance. Capturing a good glimpse of a Mothman is difficult, however, as their bodies radiate an unnatural shadow that seems to absorb all light that hits them, aside, that is, from the luminance of their own crimson eyes. Mothmen, as they have come to be known by the denizens of the world, are poorly understood and seldom seen creatures. They tend to make their homes in densely wooded marshlands and forests, where they blend in seamlessly in the night. But in truth, their homes are not of this plane. There are many rumoured origins of Mothmen. Common hearsay claims that they were once harpies or Aarakocra, who ventured into the dark forests, which shared a connection with the Shadowfell, and were spat out of that plane and as twisted creatures of the night. In truth, as far as scholars are concerned, they lean towards the concept that these creatures were once of the elemental plane of air, corrupted or perhaps blessed by the Raven Queen, or some other entity who likely draws power from the Shadowfell perhaps. Twisted in the image of their master, they act as messengers and scavengers, hunters and watchers in the dark. Mothmen, contrary to popular belief, are not night harpies or shadow harpies, as the malevolent corpse-eating beasts of legend. Neither are they particularly benevolent. They are merely observers, like shadowy watchtowers in different planes, acting as the many crimson eyes of their mysterious creator. The extraplanar entity that bore them feeds them shifting glimpses of the future and asks them to prevent certain disasters or ensure that others occur, all to ensure the unknowable plots of their masters. When not following prophetic instructions, Mothmen are left for decades or perhaps even centuries to their own devices, and will act as predatory birds might. They are easily startled, especially with their poor or perhaps completely non-existent sense of hearing, which has been robbed of them in exchange for their incredibly potent sight. Lumberjacks and miners venturing into a Mothman's habitat are often surprised that their loud excavations or deforestation wouldn't warn these creatures before the terrified humanoids make almost physical contact with them. Surprised by what they perceive to be intruders, Mothmen will defend themselves viciously and without mercy so that they may resume their prophetic and watchful post. So with their connection to the Shadowfell being twisted air elementals perhaps, given form by what I imagine to be the Raven Queen or something similar, it's up to you. I made these creatures undead, but they could very easily be fiends or monstrosities. It utterly depends on you. Again, this is a homebrew creature, and if you choose to use them, you can call them whatever you like, but that seemed like a fitting explanation for me, and also gives us an undead creature. And rather than chaotic evil, I made these creatures chaotic neutral. They act like beasts after all. They are predatory bird-like creatures, but the jury's out on whether or not they use their prophetic visions to ensure disasters or prevent them, and otherwise they're going to spend most of their time just surviving, so chaotic neutral seemed like a good use for them. Otherwise, I used the stats for one of the greater harpies in the Odysseys of Theros book, as I plan to give them a very similar harpy-like silhouette. Mothman's never really described as having hands and feet, just wings and claw-like talons, so I feel like walking around at 20 feet seemed like a good idea, and then having a 60-foot flying speed. Being an undead creature and perhaps a creature of pure shadow, as they absorb all light, I made them vulnerable to radiant damage, but resistant to necrotic damage, as well as being charmed or frightened. And just because there's something lycanthropic about these creatures, they seem very like werewolves in their atmosphere, and because I wanted to make these things more of a challenge, I decided to make them resistant to bludgeoning, piercing, and the usual attacks, which are non-magical and not silvered. Keeping up the mystery, I wanted to make this thing intelligent enough, I gave it 13 intelligence, to be able to understand communications, but unable to speak. I don't know quite how it understands these communications, because I also made it deaf, but on the off chance that you psionically communicate with it, I wanted it to be able to understand you. I gave it 120-foot dark vision, but also gave it the sunlight sensitivity of drow, and like most birds of prey, I gave it keen sight, allowing it to have advantage on wisdom perception checks that involved its sight in the darkness. Because Mothman is a pretty legendary creature, I gave it a legendary resistance, meaning that it can ignore a failed saving throw twice a day, and it also has legendary actions, allowing it to fly without provoking opportunity attacks, use a dive bomb attack, allowing it to fly half its normal movement speed and make an attack, or prophesied the future, which in this case manifests as Mothman causing everybody to re-roll their initiative rolls, at which point the Mothman can decide where it wants to be in the initiative order, either maintaining its original initiative or re-rolling itself, reading the next few moments and positioning itself appropriately. Most importantly, I borrowed a fear aura from the Baylor, meaning that creatures within 20 feet of the Mothman have to make a wisdom saving throw, fleeing or becoming incapacitated with terror if they fail, and beasts and other creatures with an intelligence of 4 or lower automatically fail this save, so that all animals would want to flee its presence. I gave it a resistance to magic, because again, this is a legendary creature, it should be a little bit tougher to kill, and it's an extraplanar creature, so perhaps magic would interact with it strangely. And I tapped into that precognition one more time to give it a better ability to avoid things. Some people say that Mothman managed to survive the collapsing of the Silver Bridge, so I wanted to make sure that if Mothman is subjected to something that means that it would have to make a dexterity saving throw to survive, it would only take half damage if it failed, and no damage if it passed. Other than that, it's a fairly standard issue creature. Mothman's only described as having scratched the roof of a car and having sickle-like talons, so I decided to give it a multi-attack like most harpies, and gave it a sort of necrotic claw as its only means of attack, which deals 2d6 plus 3 slashing damage, and an additional 3d8 necrotic damage, and it gets to make 2 of those per turn, so it can do quite a lot of damage, but it's not the scariest thing in existence, and with its chaotic neutral alignment, it could very well be an ally if you manage to serenade it with an interesting song, or don't startle it by driving down a road at 100 miles an hour. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I hope you are tucked away safe at home as the autumnal weather rolls in, and far enough away from the lair of the Mothman. So until next time, happy cryptid hunting, and stay safe. Mothman, 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 Mothman. 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 Moth, moth, moth. Oh, Mothman. Moth, moth, moth. Moth. It's going to be at the Mothman. It's going to be at the Mothman. It's a Mothman. It's a Mothman. It's a moth, 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 Mothman. Moth, 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 moth. So to be at the Mothman. He's a Mothman. He's a Mothman. He's a moth, moth, moth. Oh, Mothman. Man, intro.